Week 5 of the 2025 fantasy football season kicks off in just a few hours with Thursday Night Football. In today's video, I'm going to be helping you guys set your lineup, breaking down every single matchup from week number 5 and whether you should start or sit the wide receivers in every single game, as well as how I believe they will finish by the end of the week. Before we can get into things, though, I would like to ask that if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. We begin with Thursday Night Football tonight. The San Francisco 49ers at the Los Angeles Rams. Puka Nacua has been a top 6 wide receiver in 3 straight weeks, and there are zero signs of the Puka train slowing down. He has put up these great numbers with just 1 receiving touchdown so far on the season. This guy is a target hog with a quarterback who does not miss when he throws the ball his way. He is averaging 12.5 targets per game. He is my wide receiver number 1 on the week. While Puka Nacua is sucking in targets with the efficiency that Lily Phillips sucks on other things, Davante Adams has been a very reliable wide receiver 2 on your fantasy team, with the upside of going over the top as a top 12 option. He has scored a touchdown in 3 straight games, and if Adams himself can just get better at catching the balls that are being thrown his way, the ceiling would be even higher. I got him as a top 12 option on the week. Tutu Atwell was a top 20 wide receiver last week as he caught 1 of his 2 targets for 88 yards and a touchdown, but when I can't even guarantee a singular catch every single week, he is unstartable and unrosterable. For the San Francisco 49ers, Ricky Pearsall and Jawan Jennings are out, meaning that one of the 49ers deep wide receiver pieces could end up having a big game, but with no Brock Purdy either and Mac Jones under center instead, it makes things even more complicated. This is a Demarcus Robinson revenge game, so maybe he does end up popping off in this spot. With so many injuries, though, even to wide receivers, and with a bunch of teams on bye, to me, this feels like too big of a guessing game for me to want to be a part of, even though the Rams are an above average matchup for wide receivers. So Sky with 2 Wise Moore, Demarcus Robinson, as well as Kendrick Bourne are all going to be sits for me. Next up, we move to the cold like Minnesota Vikings going up against the Cleveland Browns Sunday, London, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do hope that my voice does sound fine in this video. I am sick. I'm dealing with a 102-degree fever. I'm battling through it. Michael Jordan flu game here for today's video and tonight's stream. Tonight's stream. Minnesota Vikings going up against the Cleveland Browns in London, baby. Get your ass up at 6:30 a.m. on the West Coast to watch this masterclass. Do I feel good about Justin Jefferson like I did last year at this point in the season? Fuck no, baby. But with him coming off of a heater in Ireland with 10 receptions on 11 targets for 126 yards as the wide receiver 8 up against the Steelers, we have to just keep on rocking with him as a top 12 option. The man is just way too talented to be ranked lower than this, especially in an above average matchup. The Browns, 4 wide receivers on a per game basis. I feel very, very good about Jefferson this week, even though I get there are reasons to worry. I want a bad bitch. Jordan Addison Ray made his triumphant return from his wet, reckless charge as the wide receiver 21 last week against the Steelers. 4 receptions on 8 targets for 114 yards. With Wentz under center, I definitely don't feel good about Addison and just view him as a very boom or bust option. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he put up a similar stat line to last week, just like I wouldn't be shocked at all if he had 10 targets with 3 receptions for 25 yards. Still start worthy in the wide receiver 3 range, though, but I don't feel great about it. Jalen Naylor, I barely knew her, is one of these wide receivers that if you saw him score a touchdown on his 1 reception on the game, you would never really be shocked, which is exactly what he did last week. But if you're relying on such a low target share with Carson Wentz at the quarterback position, you are doing something very, very wrong. He is definitely a must-sit, in my opinion. For the Cleveland Browns, Jerry Jeudy is in the desperation start range where you are really just throwing shit against the wall and hoping that it sticks. Dylan Gabriel is now the quarterback 1, and while things can't truly be worse than what we have seen out of Joe Flacco against Brian Flores, the Browns could easily just not score a single touchdown in this spot. The Vikings are the worst matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis, but ultimately without Cedric Tillman, the ball has to go somewhere, so we should see a heavy dosage of Jerry Jeudy. No way you could feel good about starting Jerry Jeudy. There's no way, but he should be able to see a high enough of a target share that if you have to play him, I would get it. Isaiah Bond should see a strong uptick in looks without Cedric Tillman, and I do believe that he is worthy of a waiver wire add. But in such a brutal matchup up against the Vikings and Dylan Gabriel's first ever start, no way I would feel comfortable playing him, and I would not be willing to chance it. Jamari Thrash, just like Bond without Tillman, we should see more Thrash, but ultimately he seems far lower on the totem pole even compared to a guy like Bond, so he would be unstartable for me as well. Next up, we move to the Houston Texans at the Baltimore Ravens Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Nico Collins has been the guy that has really let us down this season. He has not been the guy that I expected him to be. And unlike Quentin Johnston, who didn't live up to my expectations at all because he's really fucking good, I thought Nico Collins would be really fucking good, and things have not gone his way. Now, largely the fault of spotty quarterback play and the offensive line blowing more than a hairdryer. Outside of week number 1 up against the Rams, he has been fine though, and we did see him flash in week 3 in Duval against the Jaguars as the wide receiver 6. Nico is one of those guys that you just fire up regardless of the matchup because you know if things go his way, he could easily be a top 3, maybe even the wide receiver number 1. In a top 5 matchup for wide receivers up against the Ravens, Nico is locked and loaded as a top 12 option. For the other Texans wide receivers, Christian Kirk, I think at some point in this season could become start worthy, but with how this offense is operating and with Kirk being eased back from his injury, there's really no reason to get cute and start him, especially when he saw his targets cut in half from week 3 to week number 4. Jaden Higgins, I do think there is some promise for him to have a solid career, at least as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in the NFL. But with just 3 total targets over the last 3 games, and with him to yet eclipse 50+% of the snaps, he belongs to the waivers. For the Baltimore Ravens, no Lamar Jackson could prove to be no bueno for Zay Flowers in a below-average matchup for wide receivers. This is one of those scenarios where you can't really sit Zay Flowers because the ceiling is super high, and because even though Cooper Rush isn't the best quarterback in the world, if they connect a few times, then magic could end up happening. But there is also the worry that he could just as easily score 3 fantasy points like he did up against the Lions in a week with 4 teams on bye though, and with all the quarterback injuries around the league, I got him as a mid-range wide receiver 2, but again, I don't think you could feel excellent about him. Without Lamar Jackson, if you are starting any non-Mark Andrews or Zay Flowers Raven, then I think you're just kind of an insane person. If Bateman couldn't produce with Lamar Jackson, what do you think's going to happen with Cooper Rush? And DeAndre Hopkins has been relying on taking one of his 2 targets to the crib, and that simply just isn't happening with Cooper Rush. Next game we move to is going to be the Miami Dolphins at the Carolina Panthers. No Tyreek, so the Jalen Waddle bandwagon is now heating up, right? Jalen Waddle is now back on the menu as a top 24 option. Tyreek was looking mighty fine like the girl on the poster in Andy Dufresne's jail cell in Shawshank Redemption ever since week number 2. And with Reek putting up respectable numbers in weeks 2 and 3 as a top 22 wide receiver option in both showings, with a touchdown in both games, I expect a heavy dosage of Jalen Waddle straight down the throat of the Panthers defense. While this is a bad matchup on paper for wide receivers, I believe his target share will carry him to being a mid-range wide receiver 2. For the rest of the Dolphins, I am very hopeful that Malik Washington can do what I think he could do when they drafted him as a Dolphins fan, and I pray to the football gods above that Malik can be the fill-in for Tyreek Hill. But frankly, that would be like saying, oh, Geno Smith, if, something happened to Patrick Mahomes and Geno Smith was the backup for Patrick Mahomes, he would be able to do the same thing, right? That would be fucking crazy to say, right? There is no way Malik can actually do that. He does see enough carries weekly that without Tyreek, I think he could have big games, but until I actually see that being the case, I would not feel good about starting him. Last season in Tennessee, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine lived inside of the end zone, but here in Miami, he is a complete and utter afterthought. Could his snaps increase without Tyreek? Yes, and I think they will. They could. end up increasing heavily enough that maybe we see Nick Westbrook, Ikain score some touchdowns. But with Darren Waller now back and him looking like a red zone target thief there for these other guys, I just don't really think that Nick Westbrook should even be on your fantasy team. Now, Tedero McMillan continues to look good on the field, but has yet to actually really live up to having that big fantasy performance. Last week up against the Patriots had their number, and saying that would be almost mean. What happened, right? They didn't just have their number. They beat the ever-living shit out of them, right? It was 42-13. If Bryce Young actually locked in, I would be banging the drum for Tedero as a top 12 option weekly, but that just hasn't been the case. The Dolphins defense just got dominated 50 Shades of Grey style by Garrett Wilson, so this should be Team Max coming out party. So I got him as a mid-range wide receiver too, even though he has only been a top 24 wide receiver once. This matchup just seems like the kind of one where he does get it done. Hunter Renfrow, for him, there will always be that week number 2 in Arizona for him. 7 receptions on 9 targets for 48 yards and 2 touchdowns. Since then, though, the guy hasn't eclipsed more than 10 yards. Renfrow should be on your waivers. Bryson Tremaine sounds like the guy that was like a frat president that would have you elephant walking around with your brothers. Outside of that, he hasn't done anything that would quantify me wasting my time talking about him. Next up, we move to the Las Vegas Raiders, which I can't believe I was able to do with my throat feeling like this. My throat feels like it has been fucked. Pause. It is so bad. It is so bad. The Las Vegas Raiders at the Indianapolis Colts. Now, Michael Pittman Jr. has been playing great this season outside of a clear down matchup up against the Broncos. Wide receiver 22 or better in all showings outside that Broncos game with a touchdown in all of those games. With a top 3 matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis up against the Raiders, you have to be feeling great about Michael Pittman here as a low end wide receiver 1. Daniel Jones should perform better here than he did last week up against the Rams, and with MPJ being the clear wide receiver 1 on the team, I love him here as a top 12 option. Josh Downs has yet to truly be jolted into the role that I and many others thought he would have this season. With Pittman playing as well as he has, and with the offense as a whole operating at a high caliber, Downs has been kind of just lost in the fray. I think those big games could still come his way, but based on him having 3 of 4 games under 7 points, you simply just can't start him at this point in the season. For Alec Pierce, he should be able to come back as he practiced in full on Wednesday with the concussion. Pierce is the clear wide receiver 3 on this team when healthy, and let's be honest, he's actually produced better than Downs at this point in the season. With AD Mitchell bending the Colts over a table last week, his snaps will dip heavily. Can't be starting Pierce either, though. For the Raiders, the Colts defense just got sliced up Jack the Ripper style by Puka and Devontae Adams last week. The defense allows the 4th most points to wide receivers on a per game basis. So while Jacoby Myers is on a downward swing in points every single game of this season, this feels like his revival spot. Shout out to Zach Bryan. 7+ targets in 3 of 4 games. And while Geno is about as unreliable as it gets, Jacoby is a mid-range wide receiver 2 for me on the week. Trey Tucker is in that YOLO start range for me. Last week, his target share got cut down heavily. 8 targets in week 2, 9 in week 3, and just 2 last week up against the Bears. Assuming that rebounds, he does have that big play upside. There's virtually 0 safety in starting Tucker, but with so many teams on bye, he's worthy of that low-end wide receiver 3 to high-end wide receiver 4 dart throw. For Dante Thornton, he has yet to actually carve out enough of a role in this offense to be start worthy or just on the fantasy radar in general. He should definitely be on your waivers. Next up, we got the New York Football Giants at the New Orleans Saints. Now, before we actually break down this game in depth at the wide receiver position, as well as the rest of the games on the slate for Sunday and then Monday Night Football, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends, our partner over at Underdog. If you're brand new to Underdog and sign up using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description, you receive a free pick plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus funds, as well as if you are a new customer, which is how you get all of those other things we just discussed, discussed. If you play $5 on the pick'em, you will get $100 in bonus funds or bonus entries. How the pick'em works on underdogs is incredibly simple. You select at least 2 players, they're higher or they're lower. If both of those picks hit, you get paid. Now, if you do multiple other picks, the payout will be higher, but obviously all of the picks have to hit as well. So make sure you guys check that out. Link in the video description or by using promo code Notorious. Now, the New York Giants at the New Orleans Saints with Malik Neighbors out of the picture. Wan'Dale Robinson is now the wide receiver number 1 on the team, which I know sounds fucking disgusting, but Wan'Dale has had some solid games this season, specifically week number 2, where he elbow dropped the Cowboys defense as the wide receiver 5 in a top 12 matchup for wide receivers this week. And with Dart looking very nice, I got Wan'Dale as a high-end wide receiver number 3. Darius Slayton's involvement should increase without Malik, and if Dart is going to just be heaving up missiles his way deep down the field, then Slayton could easily end up as a top 12 wide receiver on the week. But with the emergence of Theo Johnson last week, I would prefer to wait and see with Slayton before I end up actually rolling him out there. Hyatt has yet to record a single target this season, not starting him, obviously, so he's going to be on the waivers. For the Saints, America runs on Duncan, and the Saints offense runs on Chris Olave. This man has received 10 plus targets in 3 of 4 games, and they like him so much that they even let him throw the ball last week in Buffalo, which resulted in an interception. Outside of that, 3 receptions on 6 targets for 20 yards and a touchdown. I don't think anyone is excited to play Olave, but he gets it done for you. The upside is heavily limited because the Saints offense is bad, but against a Giants defense that allows the second most points to wide receivers on a per game basis, if there ever was a game for Olave to pop off and have that huge performance, it would be here. I got him as a mid-range wide receiver too. Shaheed is one of those wide receivers where in any given Sunday, he could catch a 50-plus yard nuke and score a touchdown, but with the quarterback play of Spencer Rattler being far from ideal, if you want a safety net of 8 points, go ahead and play him, but even with other teams on bye, I am just not interested in him. Brandon Cooks has yet to be truly involved enough for me to actually want to start him. He does actually look kind of good. I'm going to be honest with you, is very shocking at this point in his career. But since he's kind of an unk, you know, and he's on the fucking Saints, if you're not starting Shaheed, you're not starting Brandon Cooks. Next up, we got the Dallas Cowboys at the New York Jumbo Jets. Now, this is a very, very, very exciting game for fantasy football. George Pickens laid the pipe down like prime Tiger Woods on a Hooters waitress last week. 8 receptions on 11 targets up against the Packers for 134 yards and 2 touchdowns. 3 straight top 6 showings, and based on how the Jets defense has looked thus far this season, I expect another big showing out of George Pickens. 4 total touchdowns over the last 3 weeks. Pickens is a top 10 wide receiver in my rankings until Mr. Lamb returns. For Jalen Tolbert, without CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Tolbert is worthy of that YOLO dart throw wide receiver start, full court shot play. Tolbert has recorded 80+% of the snaps in back-to-back games with 6 targets. If this game ends up being a rock'em sock'em robots matchup with no defense like we saw last week up against the Packers, Tolbert could end up getting lucky like that one song and find the end zone, you know, on that huge catch. The floor is low, but the ceiling is big enough to actually justify starting him, especially again because I like the matchup and because there's 4 teams on bye. So a lot of guys that, spoiler alert, typically wouldn't want to be in our lineups. You know, there's a lot of teams on bye. Some of you guys are really on the struggle bus, me included, as someone with fucking Drizzy, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson on a lot of my teams. It doesn't feel good. Now, Turpin feeling locked in as the wide receiver 3 on this team, in my opinion, 60+% of the snaps in back-to-back games, but with just 4 targets in both games, he feels far less safe than Tolbert, so I would prefer, if I was shooting the full court shot, for it to be with Tolbert compared to Turpin. For the Jets, Garrett Wilson had the Dolphins defense in the Wuchi finger hold last week. 6 receptions on 8 targets for 82 yards and a touchdown as the wide receiver number 10. And he could have had 2 touchdowns if he didn't get an OPI called on him. But as a Dolphins fan, I will say that was 100% justified. And he deserves to be thrown in jail for doing that. Definitely, right? Definitely an OPI. Fuck you, Garrett Wilson, okay, buddy? But as a Dolphins fan, again, I think that was an OPI, so I'm not gonna I'm not going to say the refs did wrong right there. I'm going to glaze the refs. Great penalty, man. They really deserve that one. Justin Fields, I mean, it's feeling good. It's feeling right about Garrett Wilson. I was talking about it in the summer, man. I think Garrett Wilson's going to be a good play this year. I think Garrett Wilson's going to really figure things out. That Ohio State connection is proving to be lethal with Justin Fields as the quarterback. He's been a top 10 wide receiver in both games, and in 3 of 4 games, he has been a top 10 wide receiver up against a Cowboys defense that is essentially Swiss cheese, allowing the most points to wide receivers on a weekly basis. Garrett Wilson is a top 5 wide receiver for me on the week. Any other wide receiver not named Garrett Wilson is so relevant that I won't even waste my time talking about these NPCs. Next up, we got the Denver Broncos at the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, Courtland Sutton has turned into the thing because it has been clobbering time for him. Back-to-back games, putting the opposing defense on a t-shirt, and 3 of 4 games inside the top 13. As a Courtland Sutton glazer all summer, I feel incredibly validated by this opinion with a middle-of-the-road matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis up against the Eagles. With how well that Courtland Sutton has been playing, he deserves to be a clear top 12 wide receiver in my rankings. Troy Franklin was outscored by both Courtland Sutton and Marvin Mims last week, but based upon him shitting the bed in week 2 against the LA Chargers, his bounce back is promising for his value going forward. 4 receptions on 8 targets for 55 yards. Far from a must-start wide receiver, but if you're in a pickle, he is in that wide receiver 4 dart throw range. Marvin Mims made a huge splash last week, like Kevin James jumping into a pool. Wide receiver 9 up against the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday Night Football with 6 receptions on 6 targets for 69 yards. Very nice, I like, and 1 rush for 16 yards and a touchdown. And while that was very cool, if for some reason you had the Sports Almanac from 2025 and started Marvin Mims, for anyone else who has Marvin Mims on their waiver wire, don't fall for the trap here. Shout out to Admiral Akbar with his 3 of 4 games with the snap share of under 50%, and with the rise of Troy Franklin and his snap share being higher than Mims every single week, I am not interested in Marvin Mimsy. For A.J. Brown, if you drafted A.J. Brown, you're probably shitting with ease with how hard A.J. Brown has fucked you in the ass. You probably need a walker like Herbert the Pervert in Family Guy from what A.J. Brown has done to you. After he had that explosive week 3 game up against the Rams as the wide receiver 4, he followed that up in Tampa as the wide receiver 94. But at the end of the day, you cannot trust this guy. This is a tough matchup up against Surtain, but I will paint the positive picture for you. He has received 8+ targets in 3 straight games after his week 1 showing with just 1 target. And A.J. Brown has been posting cryptic tweets like he's the fucking Riddler. So while you can't trust him, you have to give him a shot as a low-end wide receiver too. Again, you can end up walking funky for another week after this, or he could leave your opponent doing the exact same thing. Devontae Smith has joined in on running a train on your fantasy team. 3 straight up stinkers and 1 great game up against the Rams. I told you all not to draft these guys in the summer, so don't fucking blame me, right? I probably told you guys to draft some landmines. I know 100% that has been the case. I told you guys to draft Calvin Ridley, so fucking sue me, right? But man, oh man, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown have been brutal. You're just kind of stuck starting them because in any given game, either of them or both of them could be top 5 wide receivers. It just feels about as gross as it gets, but Smith is in the high-end wide receiver 3 range. Jahan Johnson is live to score 0 points in any given game and hasn't scored more than 2 points since week 1, so he should be on your waivers. Next up, we move to the 4 p.m. slate of games with the Tennessee Titans at the Arizona Cardinals. Last Thursday night, which is 1 day off of that banger Katy Perry song last Friday night, was Marvin Harrison Jr.'s potential rise of being a high-end wide receiver 2 in fantasy. He started the game off looking like a 2-pack of ass, but in the second half, he figured things out, going 6 of 10 for 66 yards and a touchdown against the Seahawks. Do I think that 1 second half is good enough for me to actually be all in on Marvin Harrison Jr.? Of course not, but at least it does give me a small amount of hope, especially with the 6 best matchups for wide receivers on a per game basis. I got Marvin Harrison Jr. as a low-end wide receiver number 2. Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, they don't do enough at all to even justify me speaking about them. Calvin Ridley is banged up, and that has led to a fall in his snaps and targets. Once Cam Ward actually figures things out, we can be talking about Alec in a very positive IO manner. but at this point, we can't be talking about him. He did score in both weeks 2 and week 3, so hopefully Ward does end up finding him again, but at this point, he's just a low-end wide receiver number 3. Even if Calvin Ridley does play, his snaps will likely be lower yet again, and thus, with how he's been playing with even 85+% of the snaps, how could you be starting him with less snaps? He would be unstartable, and while Tyler Lockett is a benefactor of Calvin Ridley being banged up, it doesn't actually benefit enough for you to actually start him. Next up, we got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Seattle Seahawks. Now, Emeka Egbuka is running hotter than the sun through his first 4 starts of his NFL career. 3 of 4 games with at least 1 touchdown and 4 total touchdowns on the year. Without Mike Evans, Emeka Egbuka is going to get fed more than Fat Albert last week up against the Eagles. 4 receptions on 10 targets for 101 yards and a touchdown. Even with the Bucs offensive line compromised, Egbuka continues to perform. So in a mid-range matchup, I am feeling real nicey about Egbuka as a top 10 wide receiver on the week. Chris Godwin returned from his dislocated ankle injury from last season last week. He played 81% of the snaps, out-snapping every wide receiver not named Egbuka, getting 10 targets for 3 receptions and 26 yards. If he continues to receive a high target share in this offense without Mike Evans, Godwin is going to be useful. So I think he does play better this week as a mid-range wide receiver 3. Again, if you can get him 8+ targets this week, he's going to perform much better than he did last week. Sterling Shepard with Godwin back into the lineup. Starting Sterling Shepard would be foolish in my opinion. If he receives just 4 or 5 targets, which he has done every game of the season, outside of week 1 where he had 6, there is no need to get overzealous and actually start him. For the Seattle Seahawks, JSN has been spinning super hot fire like Bowser from Mario from weeks 1 through 3. Last week against the Arizona Cardinals on prime time, he slowed down a little bit as the wide receiver 25 after 3 straight top 13 games. At the end of the day, with how consistent JSN has been, you don't panic after 1 slight stutter. While this is a tough matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis, JSN has been uber consistent, so I feel great about a top 5 finish. Cooper Kupp feels like the wide receiver 2 on this team, but if Torrey Horton, here's a who, outperformed him, no one would be remotely shocked. Kupp has scored over 7 PPR points just once on the season, and Horton has achieved that feat twice. Until the Seahawks push Torrey Horton to actually get more snaps, he is unstartable, but neither is Cooper Kupp. You can't be starting him either, who has been downright dreadful if you played him in 3 out of 4 games. Next up, we got the Detroit Lions at the Cincinnati Bengals. Outside of week 1, where the Lions started things off on the wrong foot against the Packers, Amon-Ra has been as safe as it gets, a true condom wrap around your fantasy team with the upside to score multiple touchdowns in any given matchup. Coming off a masterclass against the Browns as the wide receiver 4 with 7 receptions on 7 targets for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns in a top 8 matchup for wide receivers, you have to be feeling great about Amon-Ra St. Brown as a top 3 option on the week. J-Mo is exactly what he has been throughout his entire career, right? Nothing has changed. He is just boom or bust. He has had 1 top 12 games and 3 games outside of the top 50. With a premier matchup for wide receivers against the Bengals, J-Mo is a high-end wide receiver number 3. Isaac Tesla flashed in preseason and earlier on in the year with that touchdown against the Packers, but with no catches over the last 2 weeks, he shouldn't even be burning a hole on your bench. For the Bengals, the 101, the number 1 overall pick in fantasy football, is 100% cursed at this point. It isn't Chase's fault that Burrow got hurt, but with Jake Browning under center, things have been brutal over the last 2 weeks. Less than 10 points in both games. You can't actually sit Ja'Marr Chase because the second you sit him, you already know that motherfucker is going to score like 25 fantasy points. And he could just take 1 target from anywhere on the field straight to the end zone, but it just doesn't feel good at all. Hopefully the team makes a move for a new quarterback, but based on what Zach Taylor has said, that doesn't sound very likely. So he's in the wide receiver 2 range. This just fucking sucks. If you think Ja'Marr Chase has been bad, T. Higgins says, hold my beer. Back-to-back weeks under 7 points and just 1 catch in week number 3. Not interested at all in him. Yoshi Voss has a fun name to say, but that is the best part about him. With no Joe Burrow, with T as well as Chase Brown healthy, there is no argument to be made to actually play him. Next up, we got the left hands up. Who are we? The Commanders going up against the LA Superchargers in SoFi. Debo was back at practice today, and with Terry most likely out, Debo will operate as the wide receiver number 1 yet again. Jaden Stormy Daniels seems good to go for this game as well, which is going to boost Debo's fantasy value. 3 of 4 games inside the top 17 at wide receiver. I am nervous about this matchup as it is a bottom 4 matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis, but with how red hot Debo is at this point in the season, you have to consider him as a high-end wide receiver number 2. Luke McCaffrey has scored in back-to-back weeks, which is cool, but with just 3 targets in each game, this kind of feels like chasing D-Hop's run from earlier on in the season, especially with just 36 and 37% of the snaps over the last 2 weeks. You gotta sit him. Jalen Stay in Yo Lane has yet to score 7 fantasy points on the year. Lane's target share doesn't exactly point towards that changing either, so I'm not interested. For the Chargers, it seems easy at this point, right? Start Quentin Johnston, you start Keenan Allen, and you begrudgingly, however the fuck you say that word, begrudgingly, how the fuck do you say that? I don't know, I'm sick, so I can't even speak, but you begrudgingly, I don't know how to say it. I'm gonna sound like an idiot, and people in the comments will be like, Nick, you're so fucking stupid. I know, I'm already stupid, but when there's fog in the brain, the fog of war is in my brain, it's even worse. So you begrudgingly start Lad McConkey. I don't know how to say it. But yeah, Quentin Johnston. If you told me before this season that by October, Quentin Johnston would be a must-start top 12 wide receiver, I would tell you that you were smoking on that crack. That makes absolutely no sense. But with how we are sitting in October and Quentin Johnston being this good in every single game of the season, a top 23 wide receiver in every single game with 2 top 6 finishes against a Commanders defense that is a top 8 matchup for the wide receiver position, QJ is a top 12 wide receiver for me on the week. Keenan Allen has been very reliable this season as well, just like QJ, which just hasn't been the case for Lad. Technically, though, Lad has been consistent. Just consistently fucking dog shit, reliably terrible, right? And Keenan and QJ have been reliably good. Last week was a down showing for Keenan with 5 receptions on 7 targets for 37 yards up against the Giants. The offensive line is definitely a big question mark without Joe Alt, but the hope here is that they figure things out over the week, right? They had to just insert a new guy in there. Last week, during the game when Joel got hurt, hopefully over the week, they figure that things out. The offensive line, truly one of the positions that needs a lot of chemistry. Once they start to gel, things typically get a lot better, at least in my opinion, as, you know, a fan of a team like the Dolphins, who the offensive line, there's just like a new guy in there every single week. Like, the center's hurt. Oh no, now our left tackle's hurt. Oh no, now the right guard is hurt, right? And there's just, it's like a fucking, what is that, like a carousel at the offensive line. Like, once you have a line that gels together correctly, even if they're not the best, if they figure things out, things could actually work. And that would kind of be the hope here for the Chargers without Joe Alt. Eden Allen's been reliable, though, so he's a mid-range wide receiver, too. Starting Lad McConkey every single week hurts so bad. It feels like you already kind of know the outcome that's going to happen, but you're just talking yourself into something's going to change. It's going to get better, guys. Don't worry about it. It's going to be fixed. And then 4 straight weeks of you just getting fucked in the ass, right? Last week, the guy had 2.1 fantasy points, right? Things will get better, I think. But that's kind of just the hopium speaking here. Lad is a mid-range wide receiver 3 at this point. It is sad, but it's true. You can't rely on starting him. Simply can't. Next up, we move to, cause you waited all day for Sunday night, the New England Patriots at the Buffalo Bills. Now, Stephon Diggs' snap percentage finally eclipsed the 60% mark last week up against the Panthers with 63%, 6 receptions on 7 targets for 101 yards. Do I feel amazing about Diggs yet? Fuck no, baby. But in a slightly below mid-range matchup up against the Buffalo Bills, Diggs has climbed his way up into being a mid-range wide receiver 3 start, which is heavily boosted either being a million teams on bye. Kayshon Boutte has been living up to his last name because the man has been booty ever since week number 1. Can't even guarantee more than 1 reception a game with the rise of Diggs in this offense. Stay away. Mac Hollins scored last week and has 2 touchdowns on the season, but with 2 touchdowns on 7 receptions, the Heat won't be able to keep up, in my opinion. For the Buffalo Bills, Khalil Shakira doesn't see enough targets for me to bang the drum aggressively for him weekly, but due to the offense having one of the best quarterbacks in the league that doesn't have a clear number 1 weapon, Shakir will end up having solid showings. He has been a top 26 wide receiver in 3 of 4 games, and assuming this is a more competitive game, unlike the game where Shakir shit the bed, up against the Jets is the wide receiver 104 with a top 12 matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis up against the Patriots. While it does feel gross to start Shakir, he deserves to be a mid-range wide receiver 3 in my opinion. For the rest of the guys, with, Dalton Kincaid scoring so many touchdowns, and with Keon's targets falling off a cliff over the last 3 weeks, from 11 in week 1 to just 11 total over the last 3 weeks, Coleman is unstartable. Just like Coleman, with Kincaid playing so well, as well as the other tight ends seeing so much usage, there's no need to even roll the dice here, even in a good matchup up against the Patriots. For the Kansas City Chiefs at the Jacksonville Jaguars in Duval on Monday Night Football, Xavier Worthy, man. I thought the Chiefs were going to utilize the just the tip technique last week with Xavier Worthy, as he was coming off of an injury, and I thought that meant that they were going to just ease him in, right? Give him a couple touches, he's got that somewhat of a serious injury, like if he gets hit again, he could fuck that up, it's a little bit worrisome. And instead of using the just the tip technique, they shoved the tip inside of me, metaphorically, of course, as this motherfucker went 5 of 8 for 83 yards and 2 rushes for 38 yards, the wide receiver 16 up against the Ravens. Now, he did only play 59% of the snaps, but I do think that will increase this week in a mid-range matchup for wide receivers against the Jaguars. I got Worthy as a mid-range wide receiver 2 for me on the week. Even with Worthy playing so well, Hollywood still finished as a top 26 wide receiver on the week. 3 receptions on 5 targets for 38 yards and a touchdown. No real reason to actually justify ranking him highly at this point, but if your team is being ravaged by buys or injuries, Hollywood could be in that YOLO wide receiver 4 range. Tyquan has scored now in 3 straight games, but with Worthy back, his snaps fell from 76% week 3 to last week 35%. Maybe he scores again, which would be hilarious, but ultimately if he sees just 2 targets like he did last week, I find that very unlikely. For the Jacksonville Jaguars, starting BTJ every single week is exactly why you start guys like Jamar Chase. One of these days, it's going to go his way. Last week, his connection with Lawrence did appear to be the strongest it has been this season, so hopefully that's a solid sign of things going more positively his way in the future. Ultimately, though, in a rough matchup, with him yet to show out like he did in his rookie year, he's just a low-end wide receiver 2 for me. Travis Hunter just sucks for fantasy football. I started to sip the Kool-Aid after being out on him a majority of the summer, and that was one of the dumbest decisions I made so far this offseason. Sure, I didn't rank him absurdly highly, but I also said I was fine drafting him. He only played 60+% of the snaps once this season, which is a far cry from what Liam Cohen said would happen this summer. I do think one of these days Hunter will have that big game and people will come back onto him, but as of right now, with 4 straight sub 10-point performances, with 1 game of just 3.1 PPR points, in a tough spot up against the Chiefs, honestly, I would just cut him at this point. I wouldn't judge ya. Parker Washington had 11 targets in week 3, which was cool for sure. Maybe he'll get 5+ targets in week 4. Nope. Dikembe, no, he gets 2. Fuck this offense, man. That's how I feel about it. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below. I know my voice sounds pretty fucked up, so normally I sound better than this, even though I obviously, people say I have the face for radio, but my voice also isn't meant for radio either. But I do love you guys. I appreciate you guys so much. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below if you are new. Leave a like on today's video. Help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. Love you a long time. As always, good boy.